What's up, Barnhill family, and welcome back to your home for all things combat sports.
Yo.
So, Nick, the whole Francis Ngannou versus Tyson Fury fight is actually shaking out, and we're starting to get some of the facts. Originally, it was unclear. It seemed like it was going to be an exhibition. There was talks of a no knockdown clause. All of that really did kind of cast a dark cloud over the fight. But it seems like this is actually going to be a real sanctioned boxing match. Now, the belt, from what I'm hearing, is not going to be on the line. But what do you make of the fact that these two are going to get in there and actually have a real match?
I love this, and I'm so glad that I was wrong about it. You know, what a difference a day makes. On Monday, we were seeing that it's an exhibition. They can't knock each other down and all this stuff. And people were probably just getting so uninterested in the idea that they could be fighting each other. And then Tuesday comes out, and they've got a whole new set of rules. They've got a whole new set of plans, essentially. Yeah. And Ariel Helwani came out and sort of, that's how I got my news for it, and said that this is a real fight. They're going to try to knock each other out. They're going to try to actually make this as competitive and real as possible. And that just makes me so happy. That's exactly what I wanted to see. And when you talk about MMA fighters going over to boxing, it's very tricky because a lot of guys are saying they'll do it. They'll raise their hand because they want the bigger paycheck and they want to get out there in front of a new audience. And maybe, you know, the crossover could lead to some big business as far as the promotion goes. But you can't just stick anybody from MMA into boxing. And I think that Francis Ngannou is probably the best bet for who you could take out of MMA and put into boxing. Because if anybody has a puncher's chance, which is essentially what all MMA fighters go into a boxing ring having, if anybody's got one, it's Francis Ngannou. He has the hardest registered punch of all time. And Tyson Fury is very hard to hit, but every now and again he does get touched. And he's been put on the floor by people like Deontay Wilder. So if Wilder can do it, I know he's a better boxer than Ngannou. But if he's able to do that, then, you know, we might see something crazy. We might see Francis shock the world.
Yeah, and I would put this fight at only a puncher's chance for Francis Ngannou. I think that's literally the only shot he's got to win this fight. And even at that, I still put it at about 2 to 3% chance that happens. Wow. I think that Tyson Fury is very likely going to get in there and show everybody why he's one of the most skillful boxers in the world. And I think that's something that a lot of people overlook about Tyson sometimes, is just how skillful he is. He moves like he's in a much lower weight class, but he's a guy who lives at over 300 pounds sometimes. I mean, it's really remarkable to see a guy of his size get in there and dance around and move around like he does. He's doing some stuff that no other heavyweight is doing right now, and I can't wait to see this fight. Now, I know there's not supposed to be a belt on the line, and this is an evolving story, so we're going to have to see if that changes. But I'm going to use Tyson Fury's own words against him. And Tyson has come out and said multiple times, I am an undefeated fighter. I am the lineal heavyweight champion, and I became the lineal heavyweight champion by defeating the lineal heavyweight champion. So by his own words, if Francis Ngannou is able to get in there and shock the world and defeat Tyson Fury, even though the WBC belt may not go to him on that night, by default, given what his opponent Fury said, you have to call Ngannou the lineal heavyweight champion, right?
Yeah, well, he's on paper not the lineal heavyweight champion, and there's a whole system and rankings and all sorts of things that go into making a lineal champion. But when you go off somebody's word, sometimes that winds up being more important to the crowd and to the masses than the actual paperwork. And I think Tyson Fury knows how to sell a fight. He knows how to, you know, talk a big game, and he's one of those fellas that believes in himself wholeheartedly, and he thinks that if he beat the guy that was the lineal champ, then the only guy that can take that title from him is somebody that comes in and beats him. And I don't really see that being Francis Ngannou. Like, we're a far stretch away from Francis Ngannou being the unofficial lineal champion, right, lineal heavyweight champion boxer of the world. But it is kind of funny that Tyson said that, and then going into it, there's no belts on the line. But I wish the belts were on the line, but I understand why they're not. You know, boxing is very much a business, and there's promotions that are pulling from both directions constantly. And this is a bit of a one-off. It's a bit of a sideshow. Although I find it to be very interesting and entertaining, I understand why the boxing community kind of wants to keep it, you know, on the sidelines, as far as this isn't real boxing, but it is very competitive. It is going to be fun, and it is still entertainment. And I think these guys should try to mix it up as much as possible, especially the ones that are in the highest level of boxing, because oftentimes we've seen promoters get in the way of two great fighters that want to fight each other that just can't seem to do it because of some silly reasons that have nothing to do with the fighters and have nothing to do with the X's and O's of the fight. You know, you got promoters that have special interest in it, and they've got money on the line, and they'd rather see somebody, you know, go out of their prime before they put their cash cow in against them. And there's all kinds of reasons why fights don't happen, but it does feel like ever since about 2021, 2022, boxers have been able to get in a room with one another, come to an agreement, and kind of put the promoters on the back end and just make a fight happen that the fans wanted to see. We just saw Ryan Garcia and Tank Davis, and I thought that was, a bit of a lopsided match. We realized it then, but we didn't know going into the fight just how lopsided it was going to be. And those two were kind of the ones that made that fight happen.
Yeah.
And I love that it happened when they were still young and they didn't have to, wait till they were in their mid-30s and nobody really cares anymore like Manny Pacquiao and Floyd did. So for me, I think Francis is doing the right thing by taking this fight now, and I think Tyson Fury needs to do this thing, make a bunch of money, and then go back and do what he needs to do to fight the few names left in boxing that are left that he hasn't fought yet.
Yeah, and I think that I'm glad that they announced this fight and then gave a specific date, and it looks like it's going to be Saudi Arabia, October 28th, I believe it is, so just around Halloween time. So it's not like they've announced something off in the distant future. We're a few months away. They're going to do some promotion. They're going to do some training. We're going to see some great content, and then the fight's going to happen. And then Fury can get back to, provided that something crazy doesn't happen, Fury can then get back to actually competing with the top of the heavyweight division. And maybe that Alexander Usyk fight comes to fruition. Maybe he fights Anthony Joshua. But any way you shake it, this is fun. Tyson Fury versus Francis Ngannou is fun. And I'm just so glad that they're actually doing this as a real match and not an exhibition, because it really would have tainted the evening.
Yeah, and one last question for you. What happens if Francis Ngannou shocks the world and does get his hand raised against Tyson Fury? Does he put the PFL on the sideline for even longer and go, fight some more big names in boxing? Does Tyson want a rematch and run it back with him? Like, what do we do if Francis Ngannou actually gets his hand raised?
It's a great question. I think if Francis Ngannou is able to shock the world and knock Tyson Fury out, which is the only way I see him winning the fight, I think he's going to stay in boxing for a little while. There's way too many enticing fights at heavyweight. If you knock out Tyson Fury, AJ versus Francis in a stadium in Europe somewhere, mega $100 million fight. Deontay Wilder versus Francis Ngannou. Maybe we go put Deontay on the same machine that Francis punched and see which one of them actually hits harder. Yeah. And I mean, talk about the two most prolific knockout artists in the history of the world, in the history of humanity. Deontay Wilder versus Francis Ngannou coming together in a boxing ring. I mean, there's so much fun to be had there. And the truth about it is, as far as MMA is concerned, I think Francis made the wrong move, because the PFL, there's nobody competing at heavyweight in the heavyweight division that's not in the UFC that's also an enticing name. I don't know who they could go pull as an MMA fighter to put in the cage with Francis that we're all going to be like, ooh, I can't wait to see that fight. So truth be told, there's a lot more fun to be had for Ngannou at boxing than there is in MMA, but that's yet to be determined.
And a lot more money for that matter.
No doubt.
And one other thing I want to touch on is the fact that Francis Ngannou's style is very much power punching, but he's also an awkward puncher, because when you come from MMA, the style of punches that you have to throw are very different than the style of punches that a traditional boxer throws. And sometimes when you're sparring people or you're fighting somebody and they have a completely awkward style and they don't fight like a buttoned up, crisp boxer, or they don't fight like a buttoned up, crisp MMA fighter, they can give you more trouble than the more skilled, more experienced, buttoned up, traditional style fighter. And, we might just see something crazy happen. We might see Francis Ngannou land that money shot, land the one big one that Tyson Fury wasn't expecting. He zigs when he should have zags, and then he gets hit by a punch from the hardest puncher the world's ever seen.
Would be wild to see.
For sure.